Good morning. Morning, Emmeline. Any questions before we get started? That's good so far. So I want to review the two types of organizations you have for your draft on Monday. Okay, Janie, did you check with the librarian?
Like in person?
No, you can chat with them online or email them. Let me show everybody where that's at, because that's an excellent question. So if we go to the library from the apps, okay, under the help section, you have the Ask a Librarian options, okay? And even before you get there, the chat window is here. So you can just type in a question like, I need one more scholarly source for my paper on this. And if it's library hours, which, let's see what the librarian hours are. But here's the chat window too here, but these are also, if you say you don't have time to chat right then and you want to send them an email and give them some time to respond, here's how you email them, and then they can work on it and send you the information back. But if you want the answer immediately, I just go ahead and chat with them right here. Let's see if they have the hours posted. Yeah, right here. So today is Thursday, so yeah, they're already there, and then they're till midnight. So yeah, if you're having trouble finding sources, they are an excellent resource. You don't even have to go. Okay, so here's what I wanted to review about your organizational options. So you're doing basically a comparison and contrast of both sides of your controversy, and you're giving us information. You're not arguing for or against one yet. You are just telling us this is what one side believes, and this is what the other side believes. Okay, so here's an example using a controversial issue. It's a shorter version than the ones you guys are going to do. So abortion is a controversial issue. There are two opposing viewpoints surrounding abortion. Okay. So let's look at both ways to organize it. The first one is putting all the information in blocks. So you'll have one block that explains one side's opinion, and then you'll switch to another block that explains the opposing side. All right. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to read through this basic organization so you can see how they're using the block method. So go ahead and look at how they're organizing the information for this. Then we'll talk about it. When you're finished reading, please type done in the chat. Couple more minutes. Okay. So you can see how they're introducing what the controversy is. And this is a very good framework for what I'm looking for your next paper, except you guys are going to go a little bit more in depth by telling me what's currently going on. So they introduce what the issue is. One of the most divisive issues in America is the controversy surrounding abortion. This is the thesis statement. It tells us what they're going to discuss in the rest of the paper. So yours might be a new controversy brought up by the pandemic is online schooling versus in-person learning. So you substitute basically your topic and what you're going to explain about it. And this is opening is basically a summary of what's going on currently. Currently, abortion is illegal in America. Many people believe it should remain legal. And then they name the sides. So yours might not have specific sides. You can say proponents or advocates. Just make sure you're making it clear that these are someone's opinions on one side of the issue. Okay. Pro-choice activists believe it's a woman's right to choose. There are many groups, however, lobbying Congress to make abortion illegal. They're called pro-life activists. And so the way they organize it is they explain everything. Basically, they summarize the pro-choice position in this block, and then they summarize the pro-life position. The way yours would be different for this paper to make it 4 to 5 pages is underneath this, you would also include several more paragraphs that deal with what's going on today. So for pro-choice, you would deal with organizations maybe and case law and groups like Planned Parenthood who are trying to preserve the right to abortion and what are some of the things going on right now. And then when you got to this, you'd add paragraphs underneath this that involve, like, some people are hoping the new Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett will help overturn abortion laws. And you're basically just kind of letting us know what's going on right now with the issue. This is a good summary, but it doesn't really discuss as much about what's happening currently. Okay. And then in the conclusion, they just sort of sum up the opinions. Okay. Both sides have strong logical arguments. That's what a controversy is. There are reasonable opinions on both sides. Okay. So it's a very personal decision. The fate of abortion rights will have to be left for the Supreme Court to decide. Okay. So that's the block option. It makes a little bit more sense with how short this one is. So let's then take a look at your other choice, which is the point-by-point option. So in that case, the introduction's pretty much the same. The thesis is pretty much the same. But then they talk about one point that pro-life advocates believe, and then the opposing point from pro-choice. And then they do the same thing with point 3. You guys are going to have additional points and evidence. Okay, so take a few minutes and read that over and type in the chat when you are finished reading. You can see the contrast. Yeah, Fabian, they're putting both points in the same paragraph on both sides. So whereas above in the block, they just discussed all of what one side believed before they went on to the other one. Okay. In this case, they're taking two specific arguments underneath, or two points that each side makes, and comparing them head to head. So both of them talk about religion. So here's what one side believes regarding religion and abortion. Here's what the other side believes regarding religion and abortion. Then they go on to another point where it's talking about a woman's rights versus the fetus's rights, and they show both sides and both opinions head to head. As far as Emmeline's question on the paragraphs, a paragraph really has to fulfill its purpose, which is you have a topic for that sentence. And so the topic for this paragraph is both pro-life and pro-choice people refer to religion. That means that the subsequent sentences have to show us and give examples of how they do that. Okay? This is a very cursory or sort of superficial look at it. You guys are going to get more in depth. So you might have examples of some things that pro-choice people argue regarding religion, and then what the pro-life argue regarding religion. Janie, this is just like a basic layout example to look at the organization. Your paper is going to be 4 to 5 pages, right? So you'll have additional paragraphs. So underneath this, you might have 2 or 3 more paragraphs that talk about religion and specific arguments they make using religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so we can do like 2 pages on one side and then 2 pages on the other side.
Yes, that's
Okay.
yeah, what you're aiming for. And then you'll still have your introduction and conclusion too. So I'm more looking at this one because it's a good framework and it has good language in terms of how to talk about what both sides believe, and then it has the clear organization options that you have. So for an issue like this, they have specific points that go against each other. So point by point works. And since yours is longer, you might consider point by point, because sometimes we forget if you talk about everything that the pro-life side believes, and then you start over again with pro-choice. If there's a lot of points, we may forget what one side believes if it's too far, you know, up in the paper. So yours is going to be a more in-depth form of this organization. So a paragraph has a topic sentence, and then supporting examples to illustrate the truth of the topic sentence. So you might say, pro-life advocates use the Bible, and give an example of a couple Bible quotes that they use to establish their viewpoint on religion and how it is against abortion. And those would be supporting information showing how religion comes into the discussion. Now, I also think this issue is too broad, right? I've talked to you guys about narrowing it down to a specific issue, like abortion pills, or should teenagers be allowed to get abortions without parental permission? They're, you know, something a little bit more specific to talk about. The final draft for this next paper is 4 to 5 pages. The next paper is 8 to 10 pages. So this paper will be 4 to 5 pages. And at least 3 pages for the draft on Monday. Did I miss any questions? So both of these are options. It depends on what you feel like works best for your issue. You know, everything about one side, everything about the other, or here's one point they argue about and here's their position on those points. Here's another point they argue about, both sides' positions on that point. Questions so far? You guys are asking good ones. So you're going to do an expanded version of this. More information on current events and examples and evidence. So that's what you're shooting for Monday, is a draft. So I'm going to put this on bright space, but I'll also put that right there if you want to copy and paste the link so you can look at it later when you're working on your paper. But it's got a nice, clear organization, which is always helpful. We read a lot of information that we have to take in, so the better organized and clearer that it is, the better chance you have of your message being heard. Also, look at the language they're using, okay? Pro-choice, they identify the sides. Now, not all of them have such clear names, pro-life and pro-choice, okay? So you could do something like gun control advocates, proponents, opponents, supporters. So clearly identify that it's the opinion of one side when you're talking about it. So argues the pro-life advocate, argues the pro-choice advocate. So you're making it clear. Otherwise, if you don't say somebody else believes it, I'm going to assume it's your opinion, and then it sounds like you're arguing against it. And right now, This paper is informational. You are explaining both sides rather than taking a position right now. Okay? So, any questions about what I'm looking for? All right, then let's talk about citing sources, right? We started talking about how to get the sources into your paper yesterday, about paraphrasing and quoting and summarizing. So let's look at an example MLA paper and how your citations are going to look. Remember the presentation that everybody did and that we saw the PowerPoints for? You might want to review this to make sure that you attribute correctly the sources that you're using, that you show us basically where your information came from. That's the purpose of APA MLA, is to basically show rigor, to show that you have reliable sources and that you're drawing upon them and where we can find them. So let's look at an example paper. So again, we've got the format you guys have become familiar with your last name and page number, the information in this format, right? The title, it's all double spaced. Now, I will warn you, and we're going to talk about this on Monday, this instructor has given them permission to use personal pronouns, but you generally don't use personal pronouns in academic writing. So if you'll notice, the one that we just looked at, this essay, none of it has I or you. Okay, it's all in third person. But if your instructor gives you permission, so use personal pronouns at your instructor's discretion. And I am saying do not use personal pronouns for this next paper. You can use them in the draft and then we'll help you switch it to third person. But it really, since you're not expressing your opinion, there shouldn't be any I believe or I think. You're going to say this side thinks, this side believes, okay? So then they're writing the paper, right? And then they start to cite sources. You can divide it with headings if you wish to. Usually for this shorter paper, you don't particularly need headings. But here is where they've used a quote, okay? One of these improvements was the development of canals and steamboats, which allowed farmers to sell what previously had been unsellable. Now they misspelled unsellable. So we're going to talk about how to handle quotes too. This little word in brackets, square brackets, sick, means it's a little Latin word that means as I found it, which means it was screwed up when I got here, I didn't do it. Because otherwise we might think that you altered the quote unintentionally. So if you identify an error right after the error, you're going to put sick. We know that it was part of the original. Okay. So you can see how smoothly the signal phrase flows into the quote. Very well done. It sounds like a normal sentence. So make sure if you're quoting part of something that it sounds like a normal sentence when we read it, you know, which allowed farmers to sell what previously had been unsellable. You know, it just flows really well and resulted in a substantial increase in farmers' ability to earn income. So apparently this quote came from this source. Remember, the general rule is that we need the author's last name and a page number if a page number exists. Sometimes it's not. You just might have in your writing, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, and there's no specific author for that web page noted. If there is, use the author's name, but if there's not, you telling me the American Academy of Pediatrics is sufficient for me to go to last page to look at your works cited. then I can look it up alphabetically. In this case, the author's last name is Danoff, right? So here it is. This would be the rest of the information. You don't put that information up in the paper because it would really horribly interrupt the flow of the paper. You know, you have this small discrete in-text citation with the author's last name and page number. So we can go look it up here. And that's why you put them in alphabetical order, and that's why you have this weird spacing where the first line is flush with the margin, and then if there are other lines underneath, they're indented. A quick trick for doing the hanging tab on this is on your Works in Word. I think I've told you guys this before. You highlight this. This would not be indented, and to indent it, you hit Control-T. And what it will do is it'll keep this line here, and it will indent this correctly for whatever is highlighted. You can also Google it. It'll tell you how to. It's called a hanging indent if you're Googling it. But that's how it works. Anything that you take from the source, just like they did here, okay? In this case, there are no quotes. They're paraphrasing it. These objectives were a response to farmers' needs at the time, mainly for the need for experiments, okay? And then this Isaac Newton ensured these objectives would be realized by stressing research, and that was the source they got that information from. So if we want to go back and verify or find that source, we can look it up alphabetically right here. So you'll know your in-text citations are correct if I can easily look it up on this page. Okay, if they're not correct, then we don't want to have to read every source to find your citation information. It has to be this first thing. What if it doesn't have an author, right? Here's one that does not. This is the Land Grant Act, okay? So in this case, you use the first few significant words in the title. So don't use the or and, but and to alphabetize it. So it might be cited as moral land grant in your paper. Let's see how they're citing it. So in this case, they just mentioned it in her writing. When President Lincoln passed the Moral Land Grant College Act, okay? So since they mentioned it, we can, in the writing, they don't have to do it at the end, okay? And we can just go look it up right here on the Works Cited. So that's how the Works Cited works with your in-text citations. There's a connection, okay, with whatever's in your writing or whatever's in parentheses at the end. You don't have to put it in both places. If they had mentioned the author's name here, then this would just say page 5. This would not have Danoff's name. But we need enough information to go look it up. All right. If there's anything else here. If you cite the same source multiple times in a row, you don't have to repeat the author's last name until you start to cite a different author. Okay, so for example, they have this section here, and the page numbers are all basically from Hurt. Okay, and as long as we can tell you're still talking about the same source, you don't have to repeat the last name of the author. Let's see. So generally, big titles go in quotation marks, and little titles go in italics. Or, no, I just said that the opposite way. Big titles go in italics. So the major titles, like the title of a book, would be in italics. The title of a magazine like Time Magazine or Newsweek would be in italics, and anything inside the smaller version goes in quotation marks. Let's see if they have an example here. So like this is the magazine that this is listed in, and this is part of what the Land Grant Act is inside of a bigger publication. I don't think they have any other examples. So basically, anything that is a smaller part, you're going to put that title in quotation marks, like a chapter within a big book. The big book title would be in italics. The smaller parts the chapter headings would be in quotation marks. And out would be in italics, while the song titles would be in quotation marks. Same thing for TV shows. The title of the TV show, Gilmore Girls, italics, and then the episode titles, quotation marks. So do you see how that works together? To make sure index citations are correct, you have to make sure they link up with whatever those first few words are in the Works Cited citation. Because if it doesn't, then we have to read everything, and that's not the way everybody wants to check your research. It's time consuming and cumbersome and not the format. Questions about how you cite the sources? Now for the draft, people usually write the draft one of two ways. They usually just explain everything and then later on go back and add the sources in, or they throw all the sources at me and don't have any of their writing. Don't forget that it's your paper. I mean, and either way is fine for the shitty first draft. Some people will sprinkle in a few sources. Eventually, you want all of those things to come together in the final draft, where you have a good distribution of here's what the other side thinks, here's some evidence that supports what I just said. Here's what the other side thinks, here's some evidence that supports that, okay? So it's kind of like, and this announcement went up, and I'm gonna talk more about this on Monday. It's like layers, right? I call it the lasagna method. So you have where you state your point, provide evidence to back it up, and then explain that evidence. And then you repeat. So pro-life activists use religion to argue their point. Okay, so I've stated the opinion. Then I bring in some sources that show what the pro-life activists say. Okay, that supports it. And then I explain. This clearly shows they believe the Bible is a factor in considering whether someone should have an abortion. I have to, as the writer, as the author, comment on the significance of the information. So those are like the layers. So that's how you build your paragraphs, right? So you say, here's one argument they use. Here, let me show you how they use it. Okay, and here's what it means. We'll talk more about this when we're looking at the drafts on Monday. We're about to run out of time. So I'm going to end this session and start a new one for anybody who has any questions or who's having trouble. If you need more sources, I do suggest that you go to the librarians because they are very, very good about helping people find sources. Okay, but if you have other questions, please let me know. And otherwise, have a good weekend and I will see you on Monday.